Welcome to Do What Matters Most. This is the third episode in the series, What Makes Marriages Work. Dr. Scoresby talks about how it is possible to learn about and get better at loving and feeling loved. Visit mattersmostmedia.org to find more about the podcast and firstanswers.com to find tons of relationship resources.
Some years ago, I was listening to a radio interview and heard the interviewer ask this prominent publisher, who had recently left one company and joined another, and the interviewer asked this question: why did you make the change? This publisher's answer was very interesting to me, and it caught my attention because he said, I changed jobs. In fact, I looked for the opportunity to work for this new company because one time the president of this company I now work for was on a panel. And all the panelists were asked this question: what are you afraid of? Everyone said they were afraid of things like war, terrorism, crime, and so on. But this man said, I'm afraid of not being loved. And then the publisher said, I decided I would like to work for a man like that. After I heard this, I wondered how important loving and being loved was to me and realized that I probably needed to get better at it. This first experience was reinforced by two additional experiences. One was having a patient in my clinical practice who had an incurable form of brain cancer and who wanted more than anything to make certain the people who were important to her knew that she loved them. I thought as I drove home one evening that I don't need to wait until I'm about to die, so I went into my family with the commitment to do more to communicate my love for my wife and my children. Well, I spent a weekend experimenting with different ways to communicate love and then made an interesting discovery. I felt resentment and anger, and I wondered why, and realized that I had done all of these things that I thought were nice and giving and sacrificing, and no one had paid much attention to me. And then I laughed to myself a little bit, thinking I could teach a course on self-pity if I wanted to, but realized that if I was sincere about learning more about what it was to love and to receive love, I would need to continue finding new ways to communicate love to her and to my family. I will just say that as the years have passed, that decision is probably one of the two best decisions I've ever made in my life. So then, as part of my clinical practice, I began to notice that hardly anyone ever complained of being loved too much, and most of the problems I dealt with existed because there was not only not enough love, but something else instead. I often then began to ask each person to tell me about the kind of husband or wife they had been the previous week. In virtually every case, neither the husband or the wife, who were there because they had problems, described themselves as being a loving spouse. Instead, they said such things like, well, I've kept the house clean, I have worked hard, I have been thoughtful, I have been on time. And when I asked these people about why they left being a loving person off their self-descriptions, they seemed a bit shocked. I was able to point out that sometimes people's problems in marriage existed because of what other alternatives don't exist. And if they would be willing to learn how to love and be loved in order to help solve the problem, they could do so, and they probably wouldn't need to come into my office and get help. This then led to an examination of what it might take for a married couple to find more love and happiness, and so much that it would be beyond what they could imagine. So I began to ask people to tell me about times when they had been very successful at loving someone, and to also tell about a time when they knew they were loved. I learned many ideas from what other people did about both receiving it and sharing and expressing it. But I was surprised to learn that many married people have fewer experiences with each than they would like. So therefore, I am presenting this lesson about how to find more love and happiness than you can imagine. The first thing I propose is for you to consider the personal qualities of the people who are best at receiving it. I propose this because quite often we have so many barriers to receiving it, we either don't receive it well or we don't believe that it's true for us. Sometimes life is a challenge and hard, and one of the outcomes of these tough times is the idea or the concern about whether we deserve to be loved or not, or believe it to be true. The answer, of course, is yes, we do. Yes, you do. But we must be good at receiving it because it is half of a cycle that I hope you will create in your marriages and other relationships as a result of listening to this lecture. To begin with, I would like to define something so that we can communicate. It is the word displays. All emotions have displays. It's how we show or express them. Many of our feelings are expressed on our faces through nonverbal behavior and so on. And every culture has their own set of display rules. For example, if you were talking to a person from Mexico, for example, the appropriate interpersonal distance to communicate is about 12 or 13 inches. Well, in the United States, it's more than 24 inches. So you might have the interesting experience of backing up so you feel comfortable, and then the other person will move forward in order to achieve where they are comfortable. So every emotion, like love, for example, will have a set of displays, and there might be dozens and dozens of these displays. So in a way, we want to learn about what these displays are and learn how to recognize, receive them, and then, of course, display them. You might be familiar with the idea of love languages, and it's based on the idea of display. Each person may have some preferred ways to share love and some preferred ways to receive it. And that is a good idea and has real merit in my experience, but it is not the full answer of how to create more love and happiness than you can imagine, because it doesn't take into account a lot of the other personal experiences and qualities of the people involved in that enterprise. So what are the results of my modest research into this question? What are the qualities of the people who are able to receive love the most successfully? Here's what I've learned, and I've tested this in some literature, and I believe there's support for the ideas I'm going to present to you. First of all, stable people feel more love and happiness. I want to explain that. It is not true that every person's mind or emotional life has the same level of reactivity, so that when some individuals express love to them, some people feel it intensely and some people feel it less intense. So stable people feel more love and happiness, partly because they're not given to emotional extremes, and partly because they are aware of what's going on inside their own lives, and when somebody displays love to them, they tend to receive it and appreciate. It is also the case that people are better at receiving love if they have been witness to how it has been expressed. You might be familiar with the idea of a hidden picture, where you see a picture of a house and a tree and a picket fence, and then at the bottom of the page you can read the instructions. Look closely and you can see a giraffe, a bicycle, an ice cream cone, and etc. Love is like that. It doesn't exist by itself in the world in which we live unless it is pointed out to us and unless we are able to express it and experience it. And then pretty soon, all the displays of love that we send and receive become a significant part of our life, and they become part of our perceptual field, what we see and understand about other people and ourselves. Now, in addition to personal stability and being a witness to how love is expressed, the people who are better able to receive it tend to be able to calm themselves. That is, they can have the mechanism inside themselves where they can be anxious or upset, and they can, by themselves, calm themselves, reduce their fear or anger, and so on. They typically do not feel chronic anxiety, because when a person is in that situation, that's what they feel. They pay attention to it, and they're much less receptive to what love can be. As it turns out, love is a higher order emotion. In fact, if you could imagine all human feelings in a perpendicular line or straight line, love would be at the top, because it can include all of the other emotions if they're expressed under the right conditions. At the bottom of this are a set of privative emotions like anxiety or anger or disgust, which are inherited emotions. So therefore, one of the qualities of the people who receive love are the individuals who manage stress or distress well. When a person is under a great deal of distress and they feel it on a chronic basis, it kicks in a survival kind of motivation where I'm just trying to survive to get through the day. And because of that, the brain tunes out the ability to receive the love that people offer and so on. For this reason, people who often do the worst things or make the poorest decisions of their lives in terms of being loyal or faithful to friends or to a spouse have placed themselves under stress or distress for a long period of time. And then under these conditions, they don't feel loved and cared for, and therefore they are more vulnerable to the attention and the warmth of a coworker or somebody else in their lives. When they learn to manage stress better, then the brain releases that from the survival mode that they're in and is more willing to accept and actually feel the emotions of love. Another quality of the people who receive love well is that they care about the quality of their lives. They make adjustments, may change jobs, they may go live in a certain place, and because they care about the quality of their lives, they also believe that life is better. That is, there's a priority if they share love, if they receive it well, and they organize their lives as part of feeling and experiencing. So if you ask them, are you being successful? They wouldn't define success just in terms of making money or the kind of home they live in. They would define success as love being present in their lives, expressing it and receiving it. It is also the case that people who can receive it well spend little time in self-criticism. They might criticize themselves briefly, but they don't have periods or episodes where self-criticism becomes the conversation, the inner conversation of the day. And the reason for that is that if you're busy criticizing yourself, you notice that there's a certain amount of self-centeredness or egocentrism that's devoted to that. And while it's not pleasant or positive, if someone comes along and says, I love and care for you, a self-criticizer will say, oh, really? Why? Or I don't deserve it, or something must be wrong with you, or it's about time, or something else. Another quality is the idea that most people who receive it learn to receive it with gratitude rather than demand or manipulate in order to get it. If you demand it or manipulate it and you tell somebody you need to do better at loving me, then ironically, you kick loose a strong paradoxical condition where, having asked for it, if somebody does supply it, you are likely to disbelieve it because you believe they're only doing it because you've asked or demanded it. So therefore, one of the ways that you increase your ability to receive it is through gratitude, and by communicating in a variety of ways how much you appreciate the time, attention, and involvement, and the real skill involved in other people who communicate love to you. Good receivers of love are also proactive in seeking and enjoying the companionship of others, have a tendency to just enjoy people, enjoy talking with them, watching them, listen to them, paying attention to them. And as a result of that, it occurs to them that they enjoy a love experience because it is one of the best or the highest order kinds of human experiences. It is also true that when you make these love feelings and the behavior of displaying love a significant priority, people think about it every day. They think about what they can do. They can think about receiving it. They can pay attention to what other people do. You might even keep a journal, for example, and make notes of the really nice, loving things that other people do for you. And then note whether or not you express and feel gratitude for it. It is also true that people who are good receivers tend to be willing to see displays of love in the behavior of the other person. When I was working on this years ago and having a lot of fun with it, I went home one evening and my wife was sitting on the couch, and I walked in, and as I greeted her, I said, "Wow, I can see you over there filled with love for me." And she laughed right out loud and said, "How did you know?" And I thought about that moment for just a minute and realized that I might not have been as willing to notice love from her or other people as I probably ought to be. So I decided to spend a little time just looking at what people did with their neighbors or something else, and I discovered that I had been missing out on a lot of goodwill, kindnesses, and warmth experiences even in my neighborhood. So let's suppose that you get really interested in this and decide that you'd like to fill your life with more love and happiness than you can currently imagine. The next step, after taking a look at the qualities of people who are good at receiving it, let's suppose that you are willing now to take a few steps to prepare yourself to be much better at it. Erich Fromm, a popular writer a few decades ago, wrote a book titled To Have and to Be. and said in it that there was always a contest between the things we have or want to have and the qualities or things we want to be. So one of the first steps in preparing yourself to find more love and happiness is to take a look at yourself and examine which motive is the most prominent in your life. If you have a stronger motive to have something, and you measure your success by whether you have or possess what you want, then you are likely making yourself vulnerable to the possibility of less love than you would like. Well, why? Because your mind, your brain is focused on some external accomplishment, and you might enjoy the companionship of a partner who works toward the same goals, but the type of love will be based or focused on that. If, on the other hand, you are motivated to be something or be a certain type of person, you can still work toward having what you hope for, but the motivation to be and do will achieve what you want where it comes to more love and happiness. The motive to do and achieve must always be the servant of what you want to be. So you can work, for instance, but you will not forget to love and be loved because it will be prominent in your life. Love and happiness are not biological certainties. The activities and the feelings must be created. Imagine that there are over 300 ways to express love, and we can typically express only a few. Expanding the number of ways we express it increases our rate of success. So let's suppose that we take apart the idea that we're going to examine a marriage relationship, and there are 3 perspectives of it, and each of the perspective provides opportunities for you to know how to time and know how to display the right kind of love so it will be received well. Here are the 3 perspectives. 1, marriage as 2 individuals. This is what happens when we are in the beginning stages of marriage. We just think there's 2 of us, you and me, and so I understand you, learn about you, and so on. The second perspective is 2 individuals and a relationship. As we mature, for example, we catch on to the idea that there are qualities of the relationship that both of us create. So when you think that there are just 2 of you in this marriage, love is based on the individual qualities you know about each other. Therefore, you say, well, what do you like? Here's what I like. And you organize expressions of love around that notion. Now consider that as your relationship matures, you can add to your perspective by understanding more about each other and the nature of your relationship. That is, things like how you talk to each other, how you work together, what your partnership is like. When this exists, you can add love displays based on your knowledge of the individual qualities of each person and also what your relationship is like. For instance, you might realize that your spouse likes yellow, so you send yellow as a form of gift or a certain type of chocolate or something else. But now you can send love displays to remember special times for the 2 of you, like special events that you want to be remembered, special times when the 2 of you have worked together well, such as talking over some challenge and succeeding in solving a problem. These are good relationship times for flowers or a gift or a note that says, thank you for being with me and I love you. Now, the third perspective is 2 people and a relationship and the situations they share. Now, the reason why this is important is because the 2 of you may enjoy sports, you may enjoy drama, you may enjoy the theater, you may enjoy music, you may enjoy a quiet evening at home. When you get really good at sending and receiving love, for example, you will catch on to the idea of putting a love display from you to your partner in every single situation. Now imagine with me what that would be like. You're getting in the car to go out on a date. You're now in the car. What could you do in the car that would communicate love? You might reach over and take your partner's hand. You might say something. You might, since you're at the beginning of a date, you might say, I brought this along just to let you know how much I care for you, and it might be a little teeny remembrance. Or you might be in church. You might be taking a trip, traveling. And you might be in any different situation and you want to find a way to communicate love. Now think about that for a minute. You can have a passionate sexual relationship, for example, and you can enhance it if you will take the time to take all the preparations for that and include in them a variety of forms of love displays, like talking and visiting, touching, being affectionate, being warm, and learning to be engaged in non-sexual affection. So the principle is you get to add different forms of love as your relationship matures if you'll just use it. To review, when you think of marriage as just two people, then your love displays typically are related to what you know about yourself and each other as individuals. When you think about your marriage as two people and the relationship, and you can sort of understand what your relationship is like, then you have additional ways to communicate and to receive love because you can link them to relationship events. Last, when you view your relationship as two individuals, a relationship, and the situations you share, you can then add forms of love according to every single circumstance. I'll give you an example. While I was working at this and thinking about it, my wife went on a road trip. And I knew some of the places we were going to stay because I'd scheduled them in advance. And so I thought, I'll just call ahead and order a bouquet of flowers for a room in this motel. And they did, and they delivered it. And when we arrived, we walked into the motel room, and there was a bouquet of flowers. My wife at first thought that it was brought by the management of the motel until she read the note and it was for me. And she turned to me and said, "Well, how did you?" And I said, "Well, this is a good opportunity for me to tell you how much I love you, sweetheart." So then we went to another one, and there's a little bowl of fruits and nuts, and with a note for me. And I watched her begin to anticipate that as we moved along, and it began to add great fun to an otherwise enjoyable trip. I am trying to get good at putting a love display into every situation I share with my wife. I know that most of the time when we read or think about what love is, it comes out in the form of nice things we do, affection, attention, warmth, and the ability to receive it well. But I believe there are some things that most people don't know about what love is and could be. And so I would like to share some ideas about love that you might not have thought of. To begin with, there are many different forms of love in how a couple talks and listens to each other. For example, there are many different conversations and different purposes for these conversations. So, for instance, a woman might come and want to express to her husband and have him understand it. It's called listening to understand. Well, listening to understand for a woman and for a man, by the way, would be considered a very powerful form of love. And it happens because we're recognizing the emotional need of the person who's talking to us, and we're going through the process of saying, "I see you, I understand you, and I care enough to go through the process to make sure that I do." There's also a time, for example, during a conversation to listen to solve or to fix a problem. And when there is a problem and we're talking about it, failure to organize a plan to solve it would be viewed as neglect, but actually organizing a strategy to take care of it would be viewed as a love experience. And so couples who are really good at sending and receiving love will understand the difference between listening to understand and listening to solve. There is something else, for example. There is often a time when somebody will talk in order to be approved of. Little kids, little boys in particular, will come and announce their achievements so somebody can ooh and ah and say how wonderful and approve of them. But it's also the case that some people will come and talk and all they want is to be acknowledged or accepted. So in learning these three conversation types about being understood, listening to solve, and listening to approve or to accept enables you to give a form of love that we often don't think about. I'd also like to address the connection between the sense of freedom and what love is. As it turns out, the idea of love requires that when I express it, it is important that I'm self-motivated or it is not as attractive or interested to the person I'm communicating with. And that's what freedom is. So in a relationship with somebody, if you grant freedom, if you say, "I understand you, if this is something that matters to you, we certainly need to pay attention to it," and we restrict the regulation, we restrict the control, we eliminate the demand condition between the two of us, because all of those restricts freedom and the experience of love will be reduced. Anything that restricts freedom in a marriage or another kind of relationship will reduce the sense of freedom and regard. I also would like to talk about the ways different men and women perceive their partnership. Enjoyment of the partnership, just being together and making statements about that, typically is a love display. But men and women quite often are different in terms of how they perceive the relationship. Women tend to assume responsibility for the quality of the relationship. That is, they take it personally. They feel like they are somehow responsible to make the relationship good. I realize this is a fairly broad stroke about putting all women in this category, but I think I'm safe here because while women will differ in terms of how much attention they will give to the relationship, women come biologically predisposed to focus on relationship conditions because the center for language and the center for emotion typically tends to be more dense and larger in the female brain than in the male brain, which means that there is a predisposition to understand how people feel and to understand the importance of relational settings. So, when a husband communicates that he does not like the relationship, he's not just communicating about the quality of interaction. He may be saying to his wife, "You're not being successful," or "You're not being competent." So a wise man will find ways to communicate that he values the partnership. "I enjoy being with you. We make good decisions. Let's negotiate this out. We can talk through anything." And if he values it and shows loyalty to it, his wife or his female partner will feel like she's personally successful, and she'll also feel like she's loved because the relationship is valuable to her partner. Well, men, in contrast to that, are typically motivated to perform. The center of the male brain is related to spatial relationships and instrumental forms of activity, and these tend to be a little larger than in the female brain. So men organize their life instrumentally and to perform, and they want to be very successful at it. They might want to know, for example, that they're pleasing their wife, that they're doing well as a good husband, and they're carrying out their role. Quite often in a sexual relationship, for example, a male will feel like, "How did I do? Have I done well? Have I made this a good experience?" Well, in this case, a woman can add love to the experience if she will show she appreciates the partnership and approves of her husband's role in participating in it. This takes us to another quality that a lot of time people fail to appreciate. It has to do with timing and calibration. There's just simply something called synchrony in a relationship where we get together, respond to each other, and the timing of it creates a rhythm. And this rhythm is viewed as a time or a good time for us to have love experiences. This can easily be supplied in the formation of a positive sexual experience because one person's touch followed by the other touch, followed by a squeeze, a kiss, a nibble, and so on. Those things lead to increased passion. Well, if you took a look at the overall relationship and take a look at timing and calibration, it's like this. When do you communicate, and is it frequent enough? When do you communicate, "I care and I see you," and is that frequent enough? And what is the timing of it? For example, is there a way to be solicitous to somebody who is discouraged or unhappy, or do you miss those? And do you find ways of communicating about special times for your partner? So it's not too difficult, for example, if a woman is going to go on a driving trip with a friend, to put gas in her car, to prepare it, get everything ready, provide a map, and communicate, "My timing is good. I am paying attention to and loving you just at this time when you're leaving on this trip." Dozens of ways to express love through timing and calibration. Here's another form of love. It's the sharing of decision-making. Let's suppose, for example, a woman wants to remodel the kitchen, a man wants to buy a new car. And they could argue and provide evidence for the superiority of each person's position. But if you want to use decision-making as a form of love, right in the middle of the discussion about which alternative is best, if one partner turns to the other and said, "Sweetheart, tell me what matters to you right here and what is the most important." And what he's doing is showing, or what she is doing is showing, that the relationship is as important as the outcome of the decision. And that is a crucial part of partnership and love as part of decision-making. It might surprise you to hear that the differences people have in their marriage or in their relationship are quite often tremendous sources of what love are for both of them. It requires, though, that you begin to see the difference between the two of you as an opportunity to talk and visit and to come up with something that will satisfy both people. Too often individuals believe that differences create disloyalty or distrust or frustration, and in the process lead to an argument, so they try to avoid these differences. But people who share a great deal of love will smile and say, "Oh, good, we're different here. Let's see if we can talk this through and come up with something that will satisfy both of us." And in the process of doing that, if I make a concession to my partner and she makes a concession to me, I believe that these are very profound forms of communicating "I love you." It is also the case that there are gender differences in how we perceive love and how we tend to communicate it. We might, for example, give things or do things for as men, whereas a woman might notice relational kinds of things and share those. One of the experiences for us is to have a talk about our gender differences and see if we can find out ways to actually learn from one another. Women have a lot to teach men. And when you hear this, you might be, if you're a woman, you will be thinking, that's true. But it's also true that women can learn a lot from men. And so we need to open the conversation about gender differences where love is concerned. You can also love and express love for somebody's deeply rooted values or beliefs. Unless these are harmful to you or harmful to the relationship, communicating that you love somebody because they want to be honest, or that they have deep religious beliefs, or that they want to be moral in some way, or they care about giving and participate in charitable activities. These are very profound opportunities for us to "I love you for that. I want to recognize you for being like that." It is also true that we can communicate love in recognition of people's emotional states. Tiredness, great excitement, enthusiasm, or warmth. You might think it is unusual, but you might want to try out at dinner one night, giving a small gift with a little note that says, "I want you to know that I love your enthusiasm," or "I want you to know that I love you for the kindness you have shown to people," or "I want you to know that I love you for being able to adapt successfully when I forgot to make an appointment and we've had to make adjustments. I'm very grateful for you for that." These are emotional states, and you recognize them in your partner, and that's a way of saying "I love you." And when it's acceptable, then it's a shared experience. Take a look at personal mannerisms. Quite often we'll focus more on the ones that annoy us than instead on the ones that actually are interesting and fun. I once visited with a woman whose husband had recently died, and she told me that while he was alive and healthy, she often became frustrated that he left his clothes on the bedroom floor, expecting that she would clean them up. She said, "I would talk to him and I would say, 'Why can't you do it?' Then there was a long pause. And she said, 'I would give a lot just to have him here so I could pick up his clothes occasionally.'" Now think about that for a minute, because what that teaches us not to accept bad behavior on the part of our partner, but there are a lot of personal mannerisms, like the way a person talks, certain facial expressions, how fast they think. There's benefit to thinking slow and thinking fast. Common sense, different mental abilities, and so on. All these provide opportunities for us to communicate that we love somebody because they possess them. We can also communicate that we love somebody for what motivates them. I have, for example, just enjoyed and feel greatly blessed by the fact that my wife is motivated to be a wonderful mother. She devotes time for our kids, is motivated to care for them, calls, keeps in touch with them, and so on. And it's a wonderful thing for both them and for me. And I communicate to her that I love her very much for that motivation. Now I'd like to communicate about 2 love nuggets. These are nuggets, like gold nuggets, because whenever you see them in a relationship, they are quite special and remarkable, especially when they're organized as a form of love. One of them is the absence of a sharp retort, so that when someone says something unkind or critical or sarcastic, right at that moment, a partner might think, well, I'm perfectly justified in responding. But let's suppose that you don't. Let's suppose that you move on, you smile and go ahead and you don't respond. That is one nugget of love that characterizes a love relationship, and it's almost always the case when people feel like they're truly cared for and by each other. The second nugget has to do with the patience in accepting. It's simply being patient with the other person and a little bit long-suffering. Each of us make mistakes. We do annoying things, for example. We might fail when we try some things. But the display of patience in those situations is viewed by most people as a form of love and kindness, never to be forgotten. How would it be if you said to your partner, "Thank you for not responding in kind when I said something sharp to you. I love you for being patient with me. I'm trying to be better every day and I appreciate it a great deal." Very profound forms of love. Now I have a question for you. I would like you to pay attention to your motivation and ask yourself this question. How motivated am I to actually improve my ability to give and to receive love? How willing am I to make it a priority? How willing am I to learn to express it with some sense of adventure and to initiate it, hoping to create it? Am I willing to take risks to express it even though I'm not sure about whether or not it'll be reciprocated or even appreciated? If you are truly sincere about getting better at loving and being loved, here's how you can tell. You will spend time reading or learning more about what love is. You might read in a variety of sources. You might talk with people and so on. So here are some examples, in my opinion, that would let you take what you learn and apply it specifically to your love relationship. Inside a marriage, for example, there are quite a few people who are embarrassed about sex and therefore they don't talk about it. But talking about sex and talking about what you want and hope for and how you want to enjoy the experience and learning about your partner, who is your sexual partner, can be an expressive, especially tender form of what love is, because it creates a little bit of vulnerability, it creates a little bit of tenderness and special attention to things typically that we have some shy feelings about. But learning, for instance, to have your own sexual identity and participating in a way to maximize your own experience and to participate fully with the other person instead of participating sexually because you think you have to and that it's a service project of some kind, or pestering your partner to have sex, if both people can talk about it and participate fully as if they want to increase the success for themselves and the enjoyment for themselves by caring and giving to their partner, we have just used sex as a way to create more love between us as a married couple. It is also true that when you seek to understand what love is, you'll come to understand that there are forms of it inside communication that have to do with how you present yourself. How I present myself and talk about myself to my partner is a form of love. It can be a great gift to keep the other person informed, to tell them. A lot of people mistakenly think, well, I'm going to protect my partner by not talking about the difficulties I face or the challenges I face. Well, that might be okay some of the time, but it's not okay all of the time, because if your partner feels like you're not communicating about yourself, they will also feel like they're not needed, and shortly after that is, I'm not loved. So let's suppose that learning how to present yourself in a way is also considered a great love experience if you'll learn to do it well. So emotional honesty, which you may know about, is in fact a form of love if what you're talking about are the positive things that you think and feel, the positive feelings that you have difficulty expressing, and the desire to get better at it so that you can communicate better to your spouse. These forms of self-disclosure about each person are forms of love because it takes these two people to accurately see one. And seeing one person fully see turns out to be a form of love. Let me also communicate about how you present emotionally autonomy. It means that instead of blaming or attributing your feelings to another person, you simply communicate that I am feeling this or sensing this or believing this about myself, and you're allowing yourself to communicate that your emotions are not specifically tied, dependent on, or caused by the other person, but that you're having these feelings and you're grateful for the association. When you learn to be responsible for what you feel and communicate that, it actually creates freedom for the other person and can be a love feeling. It's all right to communicate, I feel love when I'm with you. Or sometimes to say, you make me feel loved, or you make me feel appreciated. All good. But if you attribute your negative emotions, like anger, frustration, and sadness to the other person, that is not what love is. It is criticism and condemnation, and you're communicating that you see the other person as less than competent. It is also a form of love that when you communicate well about yourself, you increase the insight you have about other people, and therefore you learn to be better at correctly interpreting someone else's feelings. These are called you seem to be's. This will sound a little strange to you until you try it out. But let's suppose a man walks in, sees his wife, and says, "You look a little tired, sweetheart." Or you seem to be pretty excited. Or I can tell, that you would like some peaceful time this evening. When you are accurate and you get your you seem to be's right, it's a message of love because it's an accurate way of understanding the other person. It is also the form of love to communicate the connections that you see. When you recognize similarities between you and your partner, when you see that you're both enjoying some type of activity together, those form of mutuality is considered a form of love because when I enjoy it, I enjoy you. And when I enjoy the event and I enjoy you, then the overall relationship is also perceived as more enjoyable. I'd also like to speak about the idea of emotional intimacy. Quite often people think the word intimacy simply refers to sexual experience, but emotional intimacy is the idea of closeness, of affiliation, of the idea that I'm understood and I understand my partner. It is considered a high reward condition for a loving couple. It can be achieved through conversation where both people present themselves as I've described and also listen attentively to understand and to listen appropriately based on what you believe is the motivation of the other person. Intimacy can also be achieved by agreeing on goals and interests, by recognizing each person's need for independence as well as of mutuality, and maintaining both. It's a great gift to be able to say, if you want to travel with your sister, please do so. I'll take care of the family. If you want to go off and do something with your friends, good enough. Love exists in a relationship where both freedom to be individuals and strong sense of mutuality exists. I would also like to point out that the idea of attention and a variety of forms of attention is a love experience. I know it is entirely possible for us to become distracted by our own work so that we don't remember to pay attention to the other person. But the idea of attention to the other person matters a lot. And it has to do with noticing the person when we're with, what is being dressed or what the person is being dressed like, ideas and feelings, memories, all sorts of things that we pay attention to. And if affection and warmth is tied to this attention, then we double up on what love is. I am so impressed by the people who know how to pay attention to each other and do so through their looks, through their touch, by what they say about the knowledge they have of the other person. And I learned from somebody about the need for me to get better at that. So one time, my wife asked me to shop, and I don't like to shop, and I especially don't like to shop in women's clothing stores. But I went this time, and I was standing around feeling kind of useless while she was looking, and she would ask what I thought about this blouse or this skirt, and I would mumble something. And finally, I got tired and found a chair and went and sat down to rest. And it happened to be straight across from the women's checkout counter and change room. And as I was sitting there, a woman walked out, and she was wearing a blue pantsuit. And my eye caught hers and smiled, and she smiled, and later on she purchased that. And I realized that I should be doing more for my wife, and I went back and started to ask relevant questions about who was her favorite manufacturer, her colors, her styles, and so on. And from then on, if I ever purchased a gift of clothing, I did better at being aware of and paying attention to her and what her needs and desires are. I also learned how important warmth is and peace and the simple act of companionship, going for a quiet walk. I've had to learn those over time, and I've concluded based on that since I have, then most people probably have to learn as they go, and that is the last thing I wish to include in this lesson. You can get better at this every day if you'll just try to express form and love in a new form each day, and then learn how to receive it better each day. It is not difficult to do, and if you do it gradually over time, you'll accumulate a larger repertoire of it, and then you will find out one day that you are actually experiencing more love and happiness than you can imagine.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Do What Matters Most, which is sponsored by FirstAnswers.com, where you can find new tools for families and parents of 21st century kids with a focus on emotional self-reliance. Visit FirstAnswers.com to sign up for a free newsletter. Find Do What Matters Most on Facebook and our website, mattersmostmedia.org, where you can ask Dr. Scoresby your own questions. Remember to subscribe to stay up to date with new episodes. Give us a rating and write a review on the podcast app or Google Podcasts, and let us know what you think about Do What Matters Most.